Everyone, welcome to this panel on the international student experience, both admissions and beyond. We're super excited to have you here today. My name is Joashaha, and I serve as one of the associate college counselors here at S. Montgomery. And today we have some incredible panelists that are joining us today. And so what we'll be doing for introductions is I'll be introducing them by name, and then they'll talk a little bit about their experiences within the field of international education, higher education, their own experience in terms of that student perspective. And so thank you so much for joining us, and I'm super excited to get this started. And so I'll go ahead and hand this off to Dr. Lisa Thomas to introduce herself. And so definitely feel free to take over, and the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Joashaha, and welcome to our international student panel, everyone. I'm very privileged to be part of this esteemed panel, as you'll meet everyone in a minute. I usually use talking points, so I'm just going to show a little bit about who I am, so you can get a picture of what I do. So if that's okay, Joashaha, is that okay? I don't know if you can hear me. Okay. Okay, you're nodding your head. All right, so just so you know, my name is Dr. Lisa Thomas, and I have been in higher ed for about 22 years. I'm aging myself at this point, but I'm now currently practicing as a consultant at Educated Mindset Consulting, and I focus on high school students, graduate students who are planning to go to college, and part of that includes international students. And so a little bit about myself. I'm going to share my screen, so it's coming up. I'm having a little problem here. What most people don't know about me, and if I can just, okay, here we go. So I've been advising international students for, I will say, since 1999. I wrote a grant for international students to be tutors in my supplemental instructors program. I hired them as tutors as well as instructors. And so they were participating in the CPT program. I used to be a designated student officer, DSO, at St. Thomas University, where about 60% of those students were international students. And I used to serve as an assistant dean at Holt International Business School, serving the graduate students there in their international relations program. And then I've also worked in research 1 and 2 schools, including UC Berkeley, and also private and public schools across the United States. One of the things there we go. One of the things people don't know about me is that I'm actually Jamaican. And as a Jamaican, I finished all my primary and secondary schooling when I was about 15, 16 years old. So that picture you're seeing there, I'm 17 years old, believe it or not. I took the exit exams before I left the country. So I did the O-level exams, and that's my connection to being international, because I didn't come as an international using the F1 or I-20 visa process, but I came using an alien green card. So I felt international my entire time here. Influenced to go to college, like many of you, from TV, different world back then, I'm aging myself again. And before I left Jamaica, I worked as an accounting analyst for one of our sugar industry factories. And then our family decided to move to the US around 1991, and we went to South Florida. So that was a slow process for us because we weren't vacationing anymore. We had lived in the US before, but we didn't live here permanently. And that was a huge transition for us. And so, like many of you, I want to share in this panel because I do believe that many of us come here because we're looking for a better opportunity. My journey started in the community college setting. And even though I became disenchanted because of income, as well as my family moving around, I became a stopout student. I'll tell you more about that even later on. And so for me, supporting international students, meaning providing all the insights I got from my 20 years of experience in higher ed. And so helping them understand the language, the GP, the jargons, the processes involved with being here as an international student, the visa processes, how to maintain visas. I mean, I was helping students before CVIS, so we'll talk about that in a minute. And then just personally, I just wanted to make sure that I was staying close to my culture, who I am, while I'm adding to the American tapestry. So my current work is just about advocating for students and student success, excuse me, helping students build their strong candidacy for admissions in the US and even across the world, and then just helping them with the process of from admissions to graduation. So that's who I am in a nutshell. Thank you, Joashaha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. And we can go ahead and we'll stop sharing the screen for now, and we can come back to this as we have time. And so with this as who is next in terms of introducing themselves? And so feel free to jump on in and introduce yourself and your background and things along those lines.
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Carolyn Sorkin. I've been working in international education since I was a student, so about 34 years. I graduated from Brown University with a degree in history, having studied abroad, and kind of gotten bitten by that international education bug at that point. I learned Spanish and Portuguese while I was in college. And when I graduated, I took a job as an admission officer at Brown. After the first year, I moved into international admission, and that kind of cemented my interest in helping people cross cultures in order to learn more about their fields of interest, but also about themselves and also about their host countries. So went back to school, did a master's degree at Stanford University, was a dual degree in international development education and educational administration and policy analysis, quite a mouthful. I worked in Chile for a couple of years in educational exchange, came back to the US, worked briefly with the United Nations, and then took a job developing an area studies center at New York University, where I also did my PhD in international education. After that, and after teaching for a while at NYU, I took a position as director of international studies at a small university called Wesleyan University, based in Connecticut, so still on the East Coast. And I was there for almost 11 years, during which time I worked with college students looking to study in other countries. I spent a lot of time helping them prepare to make the most of this experience. And I also helped students who were graduating to think about graduate school possibilities and to think about some postgraduate fellowships. So worked with a lot of people in different kinds of admission procedures. About 8 years ago, I opened my business, which is called University Passport. There, I work with students who are applying to do the first degree at university, which is a bachelor's degree, as well as to apply to graduate programs and professional programs. And I'm delighted to be here. I really want to thank the folks at S. Montgomery for putting this together. I'm really pleased to be on this panel with Lisa and Meeraal and Joashaha, and another student whose name I can't pronounce because I can't see it. But I'm really looking forward to speaking with you all about the benefits and the challenges of international admission.
Certainly. Thank you so much. And then let's go ahead and the last introduction, feel free to jump on in. And I know that the last panelist, we're working on getting them into the room now. And so hopefully we'll be able to see the name shortly.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Meeraal Zaheer. My relation to all of this is that I've always been an international student. I'm from Pakistan and I was born there, but I spent most of my life in the Middle East. So I lived for about 5 years in Dubai and then about 11 years in Bahrain. And so I completed all of my middle and high school in Bahrain and then applied for that from there to colleges in both the US and in Canada. And I ended up at Vassar College up in New York, a small liberal arts school, very similar to Wesleyan actually. And I studied neuroscience and behavior with a minor in Hispanic studies. I graduated back in 2020, mid-COVID, and I'm now working in the Bay Area as a neuroscience researcher at a small biotech startup. So I've kind of always been an international student from, pretty much middle school up to where I am right now.
Absolutely. Thank you all for those introductions. It's great. I'm super excited to be with this panel today. And just so you know kind of who's moderating everything, like I mentioned earlier, my name is Joashaha. I serve as one of the associate college counselors here at S. Montgomery. But prior to joining the team, I served as the international admissions coordinator at Calvin University, located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so I was one of the school DSOs there. And so worked a lot with transcript evaluations. And my primary recruiting territories was all of Europe, Asia, Oceania, as well as all international students within the United States. And so that's kind of where my interest and my background is within the international student experience. And so I'm super excited to kind of jump into these questions we have prepared for you all. And just to kind of provide some context on these questions. Some will be a little bit more targeted than others. And so some will be more about the student experience, while others will be more about the background of the other side of the desk per se, in terms of that admissions background and that admissions perspective. And so that's just the context I wanted to provide. And so let's go ahead and jump into some of the questions. And so this one is a bit more targeted to Meeraal, just because of your background as a student. And so what was your admissions experience like? I know you mentioned both schools in Canada, the United States. Were there elements within that admissions process that was surprising to you? I know that your background, from your start of your schooling experience to your college experience, obviously was all in that international setting, but the setting in terms of the application process within the States and Canada, was there anything that stood out to you that you would like to share?
Well, Canada and US were very different application processes. The US was definitely a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging because they do require a lot more. I was lucky in that I do have an older brother who also applied to the US, so I had some grasp of like what to expect after seeing his experience. But I think one of the most difficult things for me with the admissions process and was primarily choosing schools, because I wasn't able to visit them, and I know a lot of international students have the same situation. I have noticed that a couple of things have changed with COVID, where, you know, colleges have like virtual tours and everything, but I didn't have any of that. I was relying on things like YouTube videos to understand what the campus environment like it was, whether I would fit into it, because academics and everything, you have the stats there, you have everything that you can look at. So depended a lot on like Reddit, Quora, a lot of parents talking about their children's experiences at colleges on those forums, and YouTube. So I feel like there were a lot of resources for the like actual like essays and what you need to do online, but actually understanding like, is this school a good fit for me from afar was the most difficult and challenging aspect of the admissions like search and process.
Absolutely. I think it's super funny that you mentioned that, just because one of our last blog posts to go up on our blog for college students was that visit process and virtual events as international students, just because during the pandemic, obviously there was a huge shift to including more virtual events. And so I know at Calvin, we instituted these webinars where once a month we would have the chance to meet with students in this virtual setting. And it's just so invaluable to get that insider perspective of, is this going to be the right fit for me? And so I definitely resonate with what you're saying, and thank you so much for sharing that. Moving along, one of the other questions that kind of is open to anybody in this panel right now, best practices when it comes to applications and the admissions process as a whole for international students. I think that this would be really incredible to get two perspectives, both from the sides of an admissions officer, somebody with experience in that realm, as well as the student perspective. And so feel free to jump in as you feel led. But the question, once again, to just kind of reiterate that, is when it comes to the admissions process, any insights or best practices that you would share with a prospective international student?
Sure. I would say several things. One is that many universities in the United States, well, will require you to take an English language test if you come from a country where English is not an official language. Many schools, even though there's a test optional movement now for international students, you're likely to it's probably best if you submit either an SAT or an ACT score. And so I always recommend that students start test prep and start testing early so that you have enough time to take those tests more than once if you're not happy with your initial score. There are free resources for the SAT on Khan Academy. In addition to TOEFL, which is the common English language test for students looking to come to the US, there's a British test called IELTS. And increasingly, students also are able to submit the Duolingo English language test as well. I would also say it's a really good idea to make sure that your school is forwarding your transcripts, the school profile, and letters of recommendation. It's a pretty standardized process by now in the US, but for students at school in other countries where students might be applying to universities in a number of different countries, it's just a good idea to stay on top of that. And then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll leave it to my colleagues to say some more, is that I always have my students research colleges and universities by looking on the university website for professors who share their specific academic interests. And that provides material that they can then write about in an essay that they often have to write about why they want to go to that institution.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I think I agree with everything that Dr. Carolyn mentioned. I just want to add 3 more things. Pre-admissions. Think about getting your courses, exams, credentials evaluated before you get here. So a lot of times students don't realize your A-level exams come with you, your CAPE exams come with you, your O-level. Take everything with you, get it evaluated by WES or Joseph Sealing or ECE, and I'll put that in the chat later on if you like. But get it pre-evaluated so you know exactly how schools may think of it. If you don't know which evaluation service to use, go to the colleges of interest and see if they list the evaluation agencies that they accept your credentials from. So get some information, some insights before you even get here about what may be required. Another pre-evaluation, pre-admissions tip I usually give to students is think about the CLEP exam. That's a College Board testing service. CLEP exams are college level exam that gives you college credits. It doesn't give you any kind of grades or anything, but it gives you college credit. And there's a whole website on College Board that would tell you which exams and how many credits you'll get. But if you can start front loading some of those courses ahead of time, it can somehow, for some schools, they'll use that even over your TOEFL. Like if you did college composition and literature and you got good grades, you can kind of trump that. Some schools may say, no, we want you to do those college level English courses here in the US, so you still have to take the testing. But look to see if you can minimize how much time you spend in school here, so you can take advantage of your CPT, OPT when you get here. But you can start front loading some of that a little earlier. And then the last thing I mentioned, just to piggyback on what Carolyn said about testing. Test, 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 test. I know that there are a lot of schools that are test optional. Don't believe it for a second. International students are going to need that little extra lift, right? A little oomph, especially if you're going for grad school. Do the GRE, GMAT, whatever that means for you. And then the last tip is, when you're thinking of getting ready for your F1 visa or J1 visa application process, please practice your mock interview. Talk to someone in admissions at the schools you're interested in. Ask them what kind of questions you might be getting, what to prepare for, and then think about what your major is going to be before you get to that interview. Think of outside of the box majors, things like, okay, you know, in your country, everybody's going to want to be a lawyer, a doctor, etc. But what if you also said you're interested in computational linguistics or financial engineering? Think about things that give you a little edge before you come here, and hopefully that will help you prepare through the process.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Thomas.
And also just bouncing off something that Dr. Thomas had said earlier, a lot of international schools, your grading system may not be what the US is expected with. So if you're not in a conventional grading system like A-levels or IB or something like that, make sure that you prepare to get those translated for the US so that they can kind of compare it to their own grading system. It really depends on which country you're from and which educational system you go into. But to give context, I went to an international British school. So I was lucky enough to just do IB and be able to send my documents right over, but that's not always the case. But I think it is so important to be organized when you're in international applying, not only just with all the documentation that you're going to have to provide, but also with your schools, with the deadlines, with the time zone differences for deadlines. Making sure you're tracking all of that, because time zones can definitely get in the way. And depending on where your university is, there may be a different deadline from the other. So just maybe just like having an Excel sheet with all of that. And then just something that I did with understanding which schools I'm going to apply to, I kind of had this system where it was like a minimum of like 2-3-2. It really depends on how many schools you're applying to, but I chose at least 2 reach schools. So those are schools which, you know, would be a challenge for me to get into, but I'm really interested in them for whatever reason. Then at least 3 schools that I know I have a really good chance of getting into. And then 2 schools which are like almost a safety net, like you would still want to go there, but it may not be as challenging for you to get in there based on your grades or their acceptance rate, something like that. I know a lot of people who just apply to like 7 reach schools, which is very like, it's very risky to do, especially as an international. So just make sure that you do have a breakup of the, you know, types of schools that you're going into, because all schools, regardless of, you know, whether they're a reach or not, are going to provide you with an amazing education and amazing experience.
Absolutely. This information has been incredible already, and we're only 2 questions in, and that kind of is the reason I'm so excited to be here talking about this all. A few things I kind of want to piggyback off of. I think when we're thinking about testing, those tests, definitely, I can't echo it enough. Start early, give yourself the time to retake and keep improving those scores and things along those lines. Additionally, when it comes to transcript evaluations, don't look over whether it be the O-level, A-level exams, things along those lines, IBs, because oftentimes those can equate to college level credits at universities. And so make sure that you're taking advantage of that. That is such an incredible head start to get in order to take advantage of different opportunities that might be offered. Lastly, the other thing that I really want to stress here, do not hesitate to reach out to individual universities. And the reason I say that is they will have the best information in terms of what to expect with the application process. They will have the most up-to-date on testing requirements for that university, credit requirements in terms of transfers. So reach out, do not be a stranger. I can speak from experience as somebody who was one of the admissions officers. It's one of my favorite things to work with students throughout the application process, getting to know them and know what they're hoping to accomplish. And so don't be a stranger, reach out, you won't hesitate it, you won't regret it. And along with that, dependent on the university or school, don't be afraid to reach out to the immigration coordinator, because those insights from individuals who are specializing with immigration, visa requirements, things along those lines, that insight is so invaluable within the college admissions process, specifically when it comes to international experiences. Transitioning over to our next question. And so when it comes to international admissions, there are a lot of misconceptions out there. Are there any common misconceptions, theories that you would like to debunk here today and kind of just say, you know what, this isn't the way it is at all? For me, the thing I heard most frequently was it's unattainable in terms of the cost perspective. But when you get into it, there are so many scholarships available and dependent on the school, meeting full need and things along those lines. And so that's kind of what I started off by stating right off the bat, but I want to open it up here to each of these incredible panelists to speak on their own experiences.
I can start. Definitely, you know, there are scholarships available, like maybe not federal ones, but merit-based for sure, as Josiah had mentioned. I think another common misconception that I noticed with a lot of my friends just growing up is academics aren't all that matters. They're important and they definitely boost you up. But ultimately, through my experience, what I've noticed is like, if you have 2 people with the same kind of, you know, background on paper, grades and all wise, they're really going to look at your essays. They want to kind of see, are you passionate about what you want to do, what you're interested in? Or like, what is your personality like? Because ultimately, colleges in the US, they really kind of bank on the college experience and the type of people there. So being able to show who you are through your essays is really, really invaluable. So yeah, my misconception is academics are important, but they're not everything.
Absolutely. And just a note there, we will actually later on this afternoon, one of our sessions will be on writing an impactful college essay. And so that kind of goes along with what you're saying in terms of highlighting your personality, highlighting who you are within that application essay. And so just wanted to throw that in there as well.
Thank you. One of the related points that I would say is that I think Meeraal is talking about universities and colleges that use something called holistic admission. So while your academics, especially your high school transcript, are going to be very important in the application process, many colleges and universities in the US look for students that bring other kinds of attributes to their campus. And so they may be looking for chemists, but they may be looking for tuba players. They may be looking for people that are likely to take a lead in student government kinds of activities. By the same token, I would say there are some specific differences between US universities and universities in most other countries. In relation to application, one of the most important is that when you apply to university in most countries, you apply to study a specific field, economics, psychology, whatever the field might be. And that's all you study. You have 3 or 4 or 5 years of studies, and you're going to become something of an expert in that narrow field, but you don't have a lot of breadth because you don't also take classes in political science or English literature or zoology. At American universities, you usually have a year or two to determine what you might want to major in. So you have time where you're expected to explore the curriculum, try lots of different things. And then in the last 2 to 3 years of your degree, because in principle, an American bachelor's degree is usually around 4 years. There are some exceptions, but you have an opportunity to specialize in the second half of your academic career at a university in the US. I want to say 2 other quick things, one of which makes me sort of sad, and that is that international applicants are often not clear about what their chances of admission are. And so one factor that comes into play is that you are an international student. And while universities and colleges in the US do want to have international students as part of their overall community, at the most, you might go to a school that, well, I shouldn't say at the most, in many universities, that number of international students is maybe 8 to 15% of the student body, maybe 5 to 15. So of the 100% of spots that are available, maybe 15% are for international students. And of those, they don't want all their international students to come from one country. They want to have a diversity there. So if you're from a country like China, which is the country that sends the highest number of students to the US for education, the bar is much higher just because there are so many excellent students applying. If you're from a country that doesn't send a lot of international students to the US, you might be even more interesting to a college or university admission office. So it's worth keeping that in mind. And as Meeraal was saying before, as when you put together a list of schools that balances risk, meaning some schools that are high risk, some schools that you're pretty sure you're going to get into, and some in the middle, think about that not only in terms of your own academic performance to date, but also in terms of that question of selectivity for international students. The other thing I would say is something that I come across with certain groups of international students, and that is that they have a tendency to assess whether they want to go to a particular school on the basis of its reputation in their home country. I think they sometimes miss out on phenomenal opportunities to learn in a given field by thinking that they have to go to sort of a name brand school. There are between 3,000 and 4,000 institutions of higher education in the US. That's a lot. And many of them are places where you can get a really extraordinary education. So when you're thinking about where to apply, you might have to think about reputation a little bit because you're probably going back to your home country, and it helps to go to an institution that's known. But think also about what your goals are, what kind of an experience you're looking to have, not only academically, but also culturally and socially. Think about schools that may be in a wider geographic range than you were originally planning. Think about schools that are not necessarily known at home for a particular field. If there's a professor there whose research interests align with yours, if there's an academic program that fits your particular interests, try to cast a wide net so that you're making sure to kind of cover a lot of ground and really see what's out there.
Absolutely.
I think you guys have covered most of the misconceptions, but I have a few more just for you to think about. Just to piggyback on what something Carolyn said is, remember your international student uniqueness is your superpower. Telling who you are, staying close to your culture and adding to the American tapestry is key to your application, right? What are you going to contribute to the institution as well as the American tapestry while you're here, especially if you decide to do OPT. Second thing is, watch out for those rankings. I can't emphasize it even more, Carolyn, because we get caught up in US rankings and this world report and that world report. Sometimes these are paid reports, and sometimes they can be a little fishy here and there. But just use it as a guide. Don't use it as I have to go to that school. And I know for some countries, you all get a list of schools that you can only apply to. So I understand that. But for those who don't have a list, please think about other schools. And I'll say that with this caveat. I used to work at the community college and I had exceptional students come there because it was better funding for them. They were paying 3 times the amount regular students would pay. And so it made financial sense for them to start there. And I can tell you one of my students who was an international while I was there, she was actually one of my tutors. She stayed there, did exceptionally well, did honors programs, all her classes in honors, was a Phi Theta Kappa student as well. And then when she applied to Brown, Yale, Harvard, and Columbia, and a few safety schools, and she got into all of them. And this is from a community college going to an Ivy League. She ended up going to Brown. But the long and short of it is, don't undermine where you can start. Look at everything, look at all the options. Start where it's financially acceptable for you, as well as think about other options. If you don't go to a 4-year, there are other options of getting there. Third, if you are in a financial crisis, especially as a result of COVID, you can still come to the US, you can still do well. A lot of schools are considering hardship funding. So that's not scholarship money. These are monies to make sure if you got in and you have a problem, your parents lost their business, whatever it is, there's something called hardship funding. And many schools, especially large institutions, have that available to you. So don't knock yourself out and say, oh, I can't make it. That's a misconception. You should call the school and ask, are there any fundings outside of what I can bring from my home country? Even though sometimes I know you have to show some kind of affidavit that you can support yourself. Last but not least, please take advantage of the credit maximum. You are paying exorbitant amount of money for the same amount of credits. And if you take 12 or just 13, when you can go all the way up to the max, sometimes the max is 18 or 21 credits, you are shorting yourself, right? And you're extending your time longer than you ought to. So think about, if you can, and it's feasible and you're not exhausted, take the amount of credits that will allow you to finish on time and do more. And of course, that includes doing CPT, which is you can work while you're in school, less than 20 hours or less, as well as OPT at the end after graduation. So take advantage of taking the maximum of credits as you're in school.
Absolutely. Great input. Thank you so much for everyone sharing. I think it is important. We've been throwing around terms like CPT, OPT. So I think it is important to kind of clarify kind of what those are. And so CPT is otherwise known as, I believe it is curricular practical training. And what this is, it allows you to partake in an internship, work during your time enrolled as an F1 student at that university. OPT comes after you graduate, where you have the opportunity to stay in the United States or under this extension of your visa to work in a field closely related to your field of study. And so that's actually a question that I wanted to ask. Meeraal, did you take advantage of CPT, OPT during your time as a student within the States?
Yes, and I recommend every single student does. I'm still on OPT, so I graduated in 2020. The US has a thing where if your major classifies under STEM, and they have like a wide range of ones that do, some that you don't expect should still do, like architecture, which recently got on, but it is great. So when you have a STEM major, you can extend your OPT from 1 year to 3 years, and that's what I'm currently doing. One thing I don't think I mentioned is I'm applying for PhD programs this year. So what I did is, instead of applying for the H-1B, which is really hard to get because it's a lottery system and that's an official work visa as an international, I decided to ride out my 3 years of OPT, and then right after that go into my PhD, go back onto a student visa, max out my CPT and OPT for that, et cetera, et cetera. But I did CPT for my 2 internship programs at Duquesne University and Yale University while I was at Vassar. One thing to note about that though is there's a limited amount of CPT time that you have. So if I'm remembering correctly, you can't do it all 3 summers between your 4 standard years, but you can definitely cover 2 summers under CPT. And if you want to do a 3rd summer as well, you can start using your OPT. I think it depends on your requirements or, your course in the US. I know I didn't want to because I wanted to bank on it after I graduated from college, but it is up to the individual person.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And just a follow-up question there. What was the support systems in place like when you were applying for CPT, OPT? Was there an immigration coordinator or a similar position that was kind of helping you throughout that process, explaining qualifications, application materials, and things along those lines?
Yeah, so I had 2 resources. One was kind of our, it's similar to CPT, but the idea of having extra opportunities outside of the college to enhance your major experience. We had a department for that who helped me with all of my CPT documentation and got it signed off. And then I also had help from my international program at Vassar, and both of them combined just helped me organize all of the documentation with that in conjunction with the place that I was interning at.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. And at this point, I do want to take a second. Our final panelist has joined us. So Joashaha, thank you so much for being here. And if you could take maybe about 30 seconds to a minute to introduce kind of who you are, your experiences as an international student, that would be incredible.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry for the delay today. I'm Joashaha Drake, as Josiah mentioned, and I am originally from Georgetown, Guyana. My studies in the U.S. have spanned over the course of the last few years, first being an exchange student and then transitioning into my current status as an F1 student. It has definitely been an experience that I love to share. This is the type of work that I enjoy. Because it shows us that education really can take down a lot of the barriers that exist in our society today. And so please feel free to ask me as much as you need, as much as you would like to. And I'm just so excited to be here with you guys today virtually. And I hope that I can be a resource for many of our participants. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And Joashaha, just to kind of give you some context of what to expect, we're going through some questions. Some will cater more towards the international student experience, and while others might be a little bit more of that admissions perspective of things. And so just wanted to give that context as we move forward. But let's go ahead and jump into our next question. And so when we're thinking about the international student experience, we've talked through testing, we've talked through a number of different things. What else do we want to add in? This is a space that I think is incredibly formative for anybody listening. And so I want to make sure that if there is different directions we kind of want to go into, different information we want to share, that there's a platform to do that. And so feel free to jump in with questions, statements, things along those lines. And we can do that right now. We are at 3:08, and so about 5 minutes on this, and then a couple more questions, and then we'll move into the Q&A time.
I can start up. One thing I would highly recommend is if the college you're applying to gives you the option to do an interview with an alumni, I would highly recommend that you take it. Not only is it beneficial for the university, but it's also really beneficial to you because you are pitching yourself to them. You can share anything that you couldn't get across through your application material, a little bit more about your personality. But then it's also a great resource for you to like nitpick into their brain about their experience in the college, whatever they had going on. I know a lot of universities, if you don't have alumni in your area, they'll let you schedule video calls. That's what I did with some of the alumni that I was applying to. It's a great resource. It can be intimidating, but definitely take it.
I think to add to that, a lot of universities will allow prospective students the opportunity to connect with students within their program of study. Incidentally, today my university is actually having accepted students day today, and I remember in my season of that, I wasn't able to attend sessions like that in person. However, within COVID being an endemic, and in the context of COVID-19, we're able to join accepted students day virtually. However, I would say that your admissions office is your best friend. And incidentally as well, one of the things surrounding my admission was that I actually deferred one semester. And so I think speaking to your admissions office will let you know of your options. Do not be scared to reach out to them. Once you have someone within the admissions office that is contacting you through your primary email, make sure that every opportunity that you get to give them a phone call. One of the things that was very useful for me while I was not in the United States as yet was that I utilized a Google number. And so I would call my school's admission office. So by that time, they knew me by my first name and my XID number. And so they'll give that to you initially. And so make sure that you make the effort to reach out to them. Admission counselors, they deal with students every day, and every year they're accustomed to the circumstances surrounding being an international student. And so it's key for you to not see them just as a subject matter expert in terms of international education, but as a resource for navigating your experience at that particular institution that you wish to study at.
That's very powerful reminders. I think one of the things that international students don't do a lot of, and I think you all, I'm going to echo what you're saying, is to advocate for yourselves. Advocate for yourselves in the best way. I mean, it's your, think of yourself as you're your own lawyer. you're the one having to talk and do everything for yourself. Your parents aren't there at any level, right? From undergraduate to graduate. Advocate for yourselves. Please make sure you're not only speaking to your international advisor. So after admissions, you'll be assigned an advisor and an academic advisor, sometimes a faculty advisor. But make sure you're not only talking to your international advisor, talk to both, get more the information that you need in terms of your academics from both. So make sure you keep those connections very, very strong, keep them strong. I think Meeraal said this earlier, please get comfortable with different peoples and cultures in the US. Get to know everybody, eat from everybody, learn the music, enjoy yourself here. Don't enjoy yourself too much, but enjoy your space that you're in, because it's not just about the school that you're going to. It's about the communities and the people in those communities. So expand and become a global student right where you are. And then becoming a global student also means practicing safety measures, right? So make sure that you're not going to things on your own. Travel with friends, companions, make sure everyone knows where you are, but also make sure that you know information about your housing, who to contact. You put this information in your phone, right? Who your advisors are, know their names, know know information about your consulate, make copies of your documents, make sure you're practicing safety measures, especially in crises. I can't tell you the number of students who said, Lisa, I went to Mexico and now I'm stuck, right? Or I went to this country and now I'm stuck. And it's because they didn't check with their consulate if their visa and their passport could travel to that particular country, right? So they were stuck. So I guess I'm calling these consulates to get them out, right? So again, practice safety measures, talk to someone about your understanding of how you can move around, not just the US, but outside when you travel and you're not going back home. Have your crisis management plan. What happens if you go to the hospital? What happens if, who do you alert? Who do you tell about X, Y, and Z? Please, please have a crisis management plan, even for your classes. Know someone in your classes, shout out folks, they're networking, right? We call it networking, but make sure you're talking to people in your classes that know who you are and can say, oh, I didn't see so-and-so today, and I want to make sure that they get the notes, or, you know, they can Zoom you in or whatever it is nowadays. And just to piggyback on what someone said earlier, I forgot who said it, but take advantage before you get here with those virtual info sessions. If you can't travel to the US right now, go to those virtual sessions, ask good questions. What makes your school different? Why did you choose that school? So make sure you're asking those questions ahead of time. And again, just make sure you're keeping a clear picture of the jargon. Do not assume you know when they say certain things, right? When I first came here, just a quick note, when I first came here and I sat in this advisor's office, she said, you know, as a minority. And I said, no, I'm not a minority. I didn't even understand the concept, right, of what it means to be a minority in the US, because that jargon, that understanding wasn't clear to me. So if you don't understand, ask questions. Go to your classes, record it if they give you permission, record the lectures, advocate for yourself, making sure that you understand the language and the context that you're in.
I think what Miss Thomas said is so apt, and I, you know, forgive me for adding on to that. I think in understanding the jargon, pay attention to the language. So a lot of the times, as F1 students, as international students, we are caught between this intersection of our travel documents and our immigration documents. So know that your visa is needed to enter. Your passport has to be valid if you seek to do any business, because that on expired documents are not valid and acceptable. And so I think that's a very important thing to remember, because those pieces of paper is what adds the legality to your presence here in the United States. Another thing that I wanted to mention was that in this day and age of influencing and YouTube, it is your best friend. And so I actually have a mentor who I met through YouTube, because I wasn't able to come to the events before I was actually in school that first semester. And the young lady, it so happened she was in my major of study. She had made a YouTube channel just for students who were deciding to go to St. John's. And so in her video, she would show you a day in the life of a freshman and a day in the life of an international student. And so sometimes the odds might be skewed against you, but in a lot of occasions, you can find so much content for your respective university if you just do a little Google, a little YouTube search, and you might be able to find something that is specific to your university. Context is very important, even in 2022. And so what might apply for the life in a student on the East Coast might not necessarily be what's happening on the West Coast. And so pay attention to the context in which you will be going to school. And even if in the cases where there's not information available for your specific university, a university on that same coast or in the similar geographic location would be most helpful to you.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. The other thing I wanted to mention when we're on like topics along these lines, I think Dr. Thomas, you mentioned this, it's not only just a school, this is your community. And so making sure that the support systems are in place that are relevant and necessary for you. And so whether that be intentional community fostered through an organization, at Calvin, it was called the Intercultural and Multicultural Student Development Offices. And it's the simple things like right when international students got to our school, our first couple of days of orientation were making sure that they had the bedding they needed, making sure that they had a phone that worked within the United States, making sure that if they were applying for a driver's license within the United States, things along those lines, that we got their social security applications in. The list goes on and on. There are so many little details that are really easy to lose track of. And so I know earlier an Excel sheet was mentioned. That is a tip I mentioned to my students. Make a spreadsheet that breaks down what you need, when you need it, what it does. And that just goes a long way in making the process more enjoyable, because ultimately this is an educational experience, but this is also your home for the time you're studying within the United States. And so we want to make sure that this is a setting that is something that helps you be set up for the highest level of success. And so that's something I wanted to mention here. As we move into the next few minutes here, I wanted to mention to everyone watching, if you have questions, put them down into the chat. Do not be afraid to throw those down there. This panel of individuals, there is so much expertise here. Do not let this go to waste. Ask questions, throw those into the chat, and we can get those addressed as we go. But another question that I wanted to ask, Meeraal, you mentioned that you're applying to PhD programs currently. Has there been a difference in the undergraduate level to the graduate level in terms of the admissions process? Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
I think what I can talk about is pretty limited because I just started the process. The applications don't really happen until around about fall kind of time. So right now it's been just the search. Like, what are the colleges I want to go to? It's extremely different from the undergrad experience. So I'm doing a PhD, hopefully in neuroscience, and the way it works is a lot of times for undergrad, like you're looking at the university just in general, right? You're just trying to look at it as a whole, but it's different for me because I'm trying to look for specific labs, so specific research being done in the university. And I'm thinking about like bigger things. I'm thinking about a PhD for me is 5 to 7 years. So I'm thinking about other factors like location is going to be very important. Community within the area I'm going to be in for 5 to 7 years during like a really difficult degree. Things like the funding that university gets for research. That's a really big part of like making sure that you can sustain yourself through those 7 years. So the things that you're looking for is so very different from what you're looking for in the undergrad experience. One thing I'll just note about both that I don't think we've actually mentioned before, recommendations are everything. Make sure that you have really robust, like while you still have time in high school right now, make connections with your teachers because they're going to be the ones advocating for you in letters of rec. And every university, PhD, master's, jobs will all require these letters of recommendations, and they take them pretty highly. So make sure that in whatever stage you are in your education, in your life, you're making really good connections with certain people who can vouch for you.
Absolutely.
I think that's what I have to say at the moment. But maybe Caroline has some more to talk about the PhD process.
Absolutely.
Sure, I'll jump in. I do work with applicants to graduate programs and some professional programs. So the time frame is often similar. In other words, in the summer, you should be doing research. In the early fall, you should be writing your statement of purpose and so on, asking for letters of recommendation early. Give your recommenders enough time to think about what they want to say and to write it eloquently. And generally, you'll be submitting applications in late fall, early winter. One of the main differences between the undergraduate study and the graduate study in the United States is that, as I said before, at the undergraduate level, you have an opportunity to explore pretty broadly in different fields, as well as specialize within your own area. Graduate school is not intended to be that way, either in the US or elsewhere. So when you're applying to doctoral programs or even master's programs, it's important that you focus in your essays on your particular areas of intellectual and academic interest and professional interest if you're that far along in your thought process, it's important when you research to make sure that there are professors at the universities you're considering whose research interests align with yours. So all well and good if you want to study astrophysics and you want to apply to University X, which has a great international renown. But if that institution doesn't have somebody who's interested in exoplanets and you want to work on exoplanets, A, they're not going to admit you because they won't see a good connection there. And B, even if they do, then you're stuck at an institution that doesn't have the resources you need. So it's especially important when you're looking at graduate schools to think about fit, to think about the fit between what you're looking to do and what that school offers.
I actually also want to add one thing because I realized a lot of people don't realize this about PhD versus master's. You pay for a master's, you get paid for a PhD. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Just like if you're thinking about finances and everything, obviously you're not going to be paid like crazy amounts, but it's a good thing to know. You can get paid more by doing like teaching positions and everything. But it's a lot of people don't know that you get paid for your PhD. You don't pay anything. So just something to keep in mind.
And just to note there, with some PhD programs, the funding is a little bit different. And so it is important to make sure that it's a self-funded versus a funded program. And so that's an important distinction just to make, just because we want to make sure that as we enter into this graduate education sector, that we're having the most information to make sure that we're making the decisions that set us up for success. And so that's what I wanted to mention there. As we're moving towards the end of this panel, first and foremost, thank each and every one of you so much for being here, but we've covered a lot of information. Is there anything you feel we've left out that we still want to touch on? We have some time left, and so definitely feel free to jump in.
I want to say something else, and that is that international intercultural education is the kind of thing that can change your life. It can give you different ways of conceptualizing. Just like learning a different language can teach you ways, can offer you ways to express yourself that you might not be able to do in your initial language, in your home country's language. I encourage all of you when you get here, if you do, to make sure that your learning is going on 24/7. I don't think it's going to be hard for you to do that, but you're learning in the classroom. You're also learning by interacting with peers and professors and bosses if you're working. Usually you can only work on campus as an international student, but there are many, many ways to learn and many ways to really, I'm thinking of a phrase in Spanish, to squeeze the last drop of juice out of your opportunities here. Spend time with students from your home country, spend time with other international students, spend time with Americans. Americans need to know about the rest of the world as much as the rest of the world might want to know about the US. And I think it's really important to think of yourself a little bit as an ambassador, as well as an anthropologist. So you're there to absorb and to learn and to ask questions and to think about differences. It's a very heady, very exciting opportunity. And I think I'm going to go out on a limb here and say everybody on the panel will agree with me when I say it's a phenomenal opportunity, and we wish you great, great success.
Yes, and to add to what Ms. Sorkin said, I think one of the things that students who are in their home countries preparing to come to the US to study have to say to themselves that you have come this far because you are among some of the most bright minds in your respective countries. And so the decision that an international student is making to leave his or her home country to go to another place to live and study and learn is one that takes a lot of bravery. And so I think our students have to commend themselves for that, for even deciding that this is something that they want to do and then making the necessary steps to do it. On the topic of being global ambassadors, think of yourselves as global citizens. You will be embarking on the opportunity of a lifetime to live in a country with so many different cultures and languages, and challenge yourself not to just learn one more language, but to expose yourself to multiple languages. Depending on where you are in the US, where you're planning to study, the languages will range from Spanish to the least spoken languages on the eastern part of this world. And so my encouragement to you is to see the validity in all of the cultures that you interact in. And so cultural relativism is something that is thrown out a lot, but understand that each and every culture is valid in its own right. And so to expose yourself to cultures other than your own will give you a deeper meaning and understanding of just how valuable culture is. Lastly, to note, just as much as borders exist on maps, I think there's something to be said for the borders that exist within cultures, whether it be a language barrier or just the etiquette systems that you might not be aware of because you're coming from another culture. Respect is fundamental, and so respecting yourself and respecting that culture and its people that are a part of it is the key to crossing those borders, because in those borders you don't get a visa or you use your passport. You use respect and the warmth that you can bring to interact with people wherever they're from, just as you expect them to interact with you where you're coming from. Best wishes to our students. You guys will do fantastic. Just the mere thought and fact of deciding to take on this is such a feat that you must pat yourself on the back for. And so best wishes and congratulations.
I don't know if we still have time, but my last two best practices is one is practice self-care. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, taking care of your mental health, physical health, spiritual health. Find a church if you go to church, a synagogue, whatever it is. Ask your family to send you food if you start feeling homesick. Food is a big part of our health. Just practice self-care. Part of self-care also means practicing personal and professional development, right? How can you become more autonomous in your own development, building interdependence and independence? Practice all those pieces that will make you what we call adulting. Practice all of that as you're here. Find spaces to do that. Last but not least, on the academic side, make sure you have an academic roadmap. Be clear, be very intentional. Find out from your school what your catalog year is, what the courses you need are, and then project your GPA to graduation. Shouldn't be a surprise when you get to the end if you have a 3.2 versus a 3.8. So practice all of those pieces, both academically and personally.
This information has been incredible, to say the least. I am putting a link down into the chat right now. This link is to some resources for international students. And so within this list, there is some information about some scholarship databases for international students. Education USA, which is one of my favorite sites in terms of breaking down requirements and things along those lines. Super informative there. Going off of what Dr. Thomas just said as well, there are a couple of mental well-being best practices and tips. This is a huge journey for international students. Leaving your home country, going to somewhere incredibly new. And so take a moment, celebrate your success. Give yourself grace throughout the process. It is not an easy process at times, but it is a process that is incredibly meaningful. And I'm just super excited to be here with each of you today to kind of break down some things coming up. We're heading into a break, and then coming up at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, we will be going over testing for college, preparing for the ACT and SAT, and that will be led by one of our associate college counselors, Carolyn. And so super excited for that. And the other thing I did also want to mention, if you're an international student watching this presentation, wondering what resources are out there for me, we're right here. This is an incredible opportunity to, S. Montgomery works with international students. We have Spanish speaking services as well. And so take advantage of that. If I had known the number of resources that were available to me as a prospective college student, it would have made such a difference in terms of my own process. And so take advantage of this. You're here today, so thank you so much. And once again, let's give up a huge virtual round of applause for each of these panelists today. I can't thank you enough for sharing your personal experiences, your insight, as well as your expertise. And so thank you so much for being here today. And I hope this was as much fun for you all as it was for me.